that tickling kind, you know?
Had it for weeks and I go away.
It took me a month to get rid of the last round of stuff, but I finally got over that and I got it something.
It's awful, I tell you. Keeps you up all night.
Not fun.
All I do is suck cough drops all day.
What do you use for cough? What medicine?
I can't take anything because I can't take anything that has a D in it. And I need a decongestant, like blood pressure medication.
Try Delsa, because I think that isn't a,
It doesn't have a D.
I don't think it has a D, I think it's its own thing, and it's just a cough supplement. It doesn't have any of the other stuff. It's the strange thing, Delsa, D-E-L.
Yeah, I've seen it advertised. I'll go to the drugstore and go, I can't deal with it anymore. Ever since I got back in Florida on the 12th of December,
Yeah,
it started, and then it's been going
but
on.
nonstop. Yeah, I'm sorry, I know, I realize.
Marsha too, Marsha's sick too, she's still not.
Well, she hasn't said she
She's
got.
not coming tonight either, or tomorrow. She's not feeling 100%.
No, I think you got, I mean, I'm not joking, it took me, that part of a month, I think.
She had laryngitis, she couldn't even talk. She could not talk at all.
That's,
It's terrible.
no, that's tough. Hey, handsome, how you doing? I can't figure out whether I just am getting the wrong switch, but I can't seem to get those lights on there. But I don't want to start messing around, so.
Oh, I
classic rabbi's way out of the not being able to use electricity, or you turn it on the night before and then it's sitting there. And were you a cholent guy there? Cholent? Did you ever eat cholent as a kid? No, that's right.
When I had milk one time, for the
Of
course, it was somebody else, but, and those hard enough.
You know, because that's what I saw, like,
Listen, in my family, it's
And this woman recommended this doctor.
Florida.
And I used to go all the way up to Queen.
Good chunks of corned beef, never tasted as good.
And you heard that literally exerted hospitals in one.
Right, that's,
And that's funny, but you can make a power, you can make a beef.
It's a cup for you.
hey,
But here's the best, even when he was working, my grandmother used to grate potatoes, like literally, like tons and tons.
Now, it's still, I wouldn't do it now.
It is like heaven, like you just wanna jump
It's
into
just so- I know-
and eat it,
I know-
because it just potatoes and a little bit of meat, and no barley, no
a
beans.
cholent cook-off, or something, Look, if people do chili cook-offs, why wouldn't we do a cholent one? That seems reasonable. All right, David. All right. All right, good Shabbos, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. Happy New Year. Happy New Year. No, it's a strange, I'm so infrequently away for Shabbat that whenever I'm gone, it feels like I've been gone for a really, really, really long time. And, and especially when it passes over the New Year, I'm like, oh, boy, everything has changed. But I will say, since I didn't get to say it last Friday, it was really lovely to see so many of you at the lighting at the wharf. Because, this year, especially as late as it was and as cold as it was, I thought, every year I go there and I'm like one of the first few people there, and I'm thinking, all right, there'll be 10 people, 15 people, 20 people. Then at some point or another, I was looking down at the sheet and I turned around and now it was like 100 people. It's a very, very wonderful kind of feeling. And so, I hope everybody had a nice holiday break, feel recharged for a new year, and, always... It was me or Lou most of the time, except for the one night where the rain shorted out the circuit breaker again. And yeah, so that was, and then we called Nat. Nat called his guy. The guy went over. So, I think a few things to learn for next year, one of which is placement of the menorah that I heard from a lot of people. It got a little dwarfed this year, I think, without any intention to do that, but I think we got to figure out some different space for that, and figure that out. But, still lovely thing, and just lovely to be back with all of you. So we'll begin our service by lighting and blessing our 2 sets of Shabbat candles, and we'll invite up our friend, our board member, our leader, Rona Klotman, who's going to light and bless those candles. We're on page 120 if you're following us. And I'll do the lighting. My one handy act of the week. It's so funny that we had that whole period of time where I couldn't light. Some of them are easier than others.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'hamir shel Shabbat.
Amen.
Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to kindle the light of Shabbat. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Rona. And so we'll turn now to page 130 as we begin Kabbalat Shabbat services together at the very top of the page. Again, page 130. Lechu ner hanena, lechu ner hanena, lechu ner hanena, l'Adonai. lechu neranena, lechu neranena, lechu neranena l'Adonai. Naria, Naria, letzor yishenu, nekad mahafana betoda. Naria, Naria, letzor yishenu, bizmihirot Naria lo. Lechu neranena, lechu neranena, lechu neranena l'Adonai. Lechu neranena, lechu neranena, lechu neranena l'Adonai. We're now on page 131. Shiru Ladonai is the Hebrew just in the middle of the page. Shiru Ladonai, Shiru Shir Chadash, Shiru Ladonai, Kol Haaretz. Shiru Ladonai Baruch Shemo, Basru Meyom Leyom Yeshuato. Shiru Ladonai Baruch Shemo, Basru Meyom Leyom Yeshuato. Shiru Ladonai, Shiru Shir Chadash, Shiru Ladonai, Kol Haaretz. Shiru Ladonai Baruch Shemo, Basru Meyom Leyom Yeshuato. Shiru Ladonai Baruch Shemo, Basru Meyom Leyom Yeshuato. We're now on page 132, or Zarua, which is the last Hebrew paragraph towards the bottom of the page. Or Zarua la tzadik, ulehishrei lev simcha. Or Zarua la tzadik, ulehishrei lev simcha. Simchu tzadikim b'Adonai, Behodu lezecher chodsho. Simchu tzadikim b'Adonai, Behodu lezecher chodsho. We'll turn now to page 134 at the very top of the page. Zamru l'Adonai bechinor, bechinor vekol zimra, bachatzotzrot vekol shofar. Hariu lifnei hamelech Adonai, Yiram hayamum lo'ol, tevel veyoshveba. Neharot imcha uchaf yachad, harim yiranenu. Lifnei Adonai kiva, lishbot haaretz, yishbot tevel betzedek, ve'amim mesharim. Yiram hayamum lo'om, tebel veyoshveva. Neharot imcha uchaf yachad, harim yiranenu. We're now on page 135, the last Hebrew paragraph in the middle of the page. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavu lehar kodsho. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavu lehar kodsho. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romemu. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romemu. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavu lehar kodsho. We're now on page 136, the 29th Psalm. Mizmor leDavid. Havu l'Adonai b'nei Elim. Havu l'Adonai kavod va'oz. Havu l'Adonai kevod shemo. Tishtachavu l'Adonai behadarat kodesh. Kol Adonai hamayim el hakavod hirim. Adonai al mahim rabim. Adonai al mahim rabim. Kol Adonai ba'koach. Kol Adonai behadar. Kol Adonai shomer harazim. Vaishaber Adonai et arzei halvanon. Vayarkidehem kemo egel. Levanon vesirion. Kemo ben reimim. Kemo ben reimim. Kol Adonai chotzeb lahabotesh. Kol Adonai yachil midbar. Yachil Adonai midbar kadesh. Kol Adonai yecholel ayalot. Vayechesov ye'arhot. Uvechalo kulo merkavod. Kulo merkavod. Kulo merkavod. Adonai lama bohu yashav. Vayeshev Adonai melech leolam. Adonai oz le'amo yitem. Adonai yevarech et amo v'shalom. We'll turn now to Lechado D on page 138. Reminder, we'll do the first, second, fifth, and ninth paragraphs. For the final paragraph, we'll rise and face the doors we walked through just a few moments ago. Lechado di likrat kala, penei Shabbat nekabela. 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 Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad. Ishmi'anu el hamiuchad. Adonai echad u'shemo echad. L'shem ultiferet ve'litila. Lechado di likrat kala, penei Shabbat nekabela. Lechado di likrat kala, penei Shabbat nekabela. Likrat Shabbat lechu v'nelcha, ki mekor haberacha, meherosh mikedem nesucha. Sof maaseh b'machshava tchila. Lechado di likrat kala, penei Shabbat nekabela. Lechado di likrat kala, penei Shabbat nekabela. Hitoreri, Kiva orech kumi uri shir daberi kevod Adonai alayich nigla. Lechado di likrat kala, penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Boi v'shalom ateret bala, Gam besimcha uvetzola, Toch emunei am segula, Boi chala, Lecha dodi likrat kala, Penei Shabbat nekabela, Lecha dodi likrat kala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Please be seated, everyone. We'll turn now to page 140. Tzadi Katamar is the Hebrew just in the middle of the page where it indents. Tzadik katamar yifrach kerez balvanon yiskem shetulim beveit Adonai Bechatzrot Eloheinu Yafrichu Od Yenuvun Deseva Deshenim Berhananim Yihu Lehagin Ki Ashar Adonai Suri Velo Hablata Bo. Now rise in body or spirit for the Chatzi Kaddish on page 144 and remain standing for the Baruch Hu on the next page. Yitkadal ve'yitkadash shemei Rabbah B'alma divrach yirutei v'yamlich malchutei B'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael Ba'agala uvizman kari ve'imeru Amen. Yesh me Rabbah mevarach Le'alam li'al me'al maya yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitbar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei dekudsha brichu leila min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata damihiran be'alma Veimeru. Amen. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed. Please be seated. Let's turn now to page 149. We'll read the second reading down from the top of the page in English. This is an hour of change. Within we stand uncertain on the borders of light. Shall we draw back or cross over? Where shall our hearts turn? Shall we draw back, my brother, my sister, or cross over? This is the hour of change, and within it we stand quietly on the border of light. What lies before us? Shall we draw back, my brother, my sister, or cross over? Umahavir yom umevi laila, umavdihil beyom uvein laila, Adonai tzvahot shemo, El chai v'kayam tamidim l'chaleinu leolam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai, Amahariv haravim. We'll turn now to the top of page 151 and we'll read together in English. As you taught Torah to those whose names I bear, teach me Torah too. Its mystery beckons, yet I struggle with its truth. You meant Torah for me. Did you mean the struggle for me too? Don't let me struggle alone. Help me to understand, to be wise, to listen, to know. Lead me into the mystery. כי הם חיינו ואורך ימינו, ובהם נגע יומם ולילה, ועבדך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים, ברוך אתה אדוני, אוהב עמו ישראל. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Please join me on page 154. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, bechol levavcha v'chol nafshecha v'chol meodecha, ve'hayu advarim ha'ele, asher anochi mitzavcha, hayom al levavecha, v'shinatam levanecha, v'dibarta bam, v'shiftecha b'veitecha, uv'lechtecha b'derech, ושוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובישעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. Okay, we'll turn now to page 157. We'll read together in English toward the very top of the page. Standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe what we were taught before ever we stood at Sinai's foot, that wherever we go, it is eternally Egypt, that there is a better place, a promised land, that the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness. There is no way to get from here to there except by joining hands, marching together. As we turn to page 158, Michamocha, at the very top. Yabai bai bim 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 bam, yabai bai bim bam, yabai bai bim 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 bam, yabai bai bim bam, yai bai ba 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 bai, yabai bai bim bam, yai bai ba 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 bai, yabai bai bim bam, mi chamocha bai lihim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar b'hakodesh. Nor atehilot osefele, nor atehilot osefele, yabai bai bim 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 bam, yabai bai bim bam, yabai bai bim 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 bam, yabai bai bim bam, yai bai ba 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 bai, yabai bai bim bam, yai bai ba 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 bai. Yabai bai bim bam. Malachutecha ra'uvanecha, bokeam lifnei Moshe Miriam, zeli anu ve'amru, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed, v'nemar kifad Adonai et Yaakov, ugolo miad chazak mimenu, baruch ata Adonai, gal Yisrael. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Adonai, help us to walk with good companions, to live with hope in our hearts and eternity in our thoughts, that we may lie down in peace and rise up waiting to do your will. Hashkivenu is on the top of page 160. Hashkivenu Adonai, Eloheinu leshalom, Behamidenu shomreinu lechaim. Hashkivenu Adonai, Eloheinu leshalom, Behamidenu shomreinu lechaim. Ushmor tzeiteinu, uvoeinu, Lechaim u'shalom, me'ata ve'ad olam. Hashkivenu Adonai, Eloheinu leshalom, ve'hamidenu Shomreinu lechaim. Blessed are you, Adonai, guardian of Israel, whose shelter of peace is spread over us, over all your people Israel, and over Yerushalayim. Turn now to page 162, Veshamru at the very top. Veshamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam Einai beini uvein b'nei Yisrael oti le'olam ki sheshet yamim nasa Adonai et hashamayim et haaretz uvayom hashevi'i Shabbat, Shabbat v'inafash. Invite us now to rise in body or spirit as we begin the Amidah together on page 164. From that point on, we'll continue silently. As always, please go at your own pace. When you're finished at the end, if you're still standing, you may be seated. Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi yagi tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol Yehoshvei Tevel. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yahaseh shalom, Yahaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. We'll turn now to page 371 as we offer our Misha Berach, our healing prayer for this evening. Tonight in our community, we're thinking of Allegra Himmel, Lori Hertzen, Madeline Egelfeld, Rachel Bat Marsha, Sue Wartor, Abigail Blum, Kate Sherwood, Betsy Tepper, Ame and Warren Cass, Rivka Bat Rachel, Lorraine Danis, David Dowling, Devorah Bat Francis, Shelley Newmark, Diane Axelrod, Gabriella Spicer, David Kyle Klopman, Lorraine Davis, Kim Birnbaum, Deborah Block-Kroll, Sylvia Orn, Rachel Bat Ora, Peretz Ben Shlomo, and Israel Ben Yitzchak. In addition to those names, we want to give an opportunity for anyone who's with us here tonight to share additional names. We'll start on this side of the room at the front and work towards the back, and then on this side. And if anyone has names to share, just to raise a hand so I don't miss anyone.
Joan Emanuel, Jackie Emanuel, Donna Gifford, Kimberly Espinoza, Chris Hubbard, Linda Lanigan, Kelly Mulholland, Marsha Chumbaski, and Mimi Lee.
And I feel remiss that I don't know his last name. I have to learn it. But our wonderful security guard, Bart, I just found out I got here and he tore his triceps, so he's going to be out for a while. So I'll make sure, he knows that we're sending a lot of love, but we'll pray for him for sure. And by next week, I'll know his last name. I'll find out. But, we'll pray for Bart for as well. And of course, we'll invite those watching at home to add the names of your loved ones as well. And we'll join together in the Mishaberach on page 371, just in the middle of the page. Mishaberach Avoteinu Mekor HaBracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mishaberach Imotenu Mekor HaBracha Lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. We now offer our prayer for Israel in time of war. Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu, our God and God of our ancestors, you know that the Jewish people are one nation with one heart, and now that heart is broken. O healer of broken hearts, binder of their wounds, be with our brothers and sisters who've been taken captive and with the families of the victims. Watch over the hostages, break their bonds, and bring them out from darkness to light. Proclaim release to the captives, liberation to the imprisoned. Comfort the families, bring them under the shelter of your wings. Bring complete healing of body and spirit to all of the wounded. Bind up our wounds and grant us healing. Tzur Yisrael v'go'alo, rock and redeemer of the people Israel. Bless the state of Israel, the initial manifestation of our redemption. Shield it with your care, spread over it your shelter of peace. Guide its leaders and advisors with your light and your truth. Grace them with your good counsel. Strengthen the hands of those who defend us. Crown their efforts with victory. Bless the land with peace, its inhabitants with lasting joy. Shomer Yisrael, guardian of Israel. Strengthen and bless the defenders of Israel who stand guard on the land, in the air, and on the sea. May we see the promise of the psalmist realized. You turned my mourning into dancing, my sackcloth into robes of joy. God, protect, preserve, and restore peace and well-being to Israel, your people, and together we say, Amen. Well, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I'm always a little worried after a week off whether I get rusty, whether my sermons, he'll tell me honestly afterwards. And I'm sorry that I missed last week's presentation with David and Steve. I'm sure it was wonderful. I'll have to go back and rewatch it, but I hope you all had a wonderful time last week with Will and with everybody else. So this week's Parshat Vayigash, we're almost at the very end of the book of Genesis, the penultimate story in which we're seeing the line again of Abraham and Sarah all the way through now the Joseph narrative, and this is sort of the big climax of the story. So those that may have forgotten, the earlier parts of the relationship between Joseph and his brothers doesn't go so well. He ends up being thrown into a pit, sold into slavery. He ends up in Egypt through a series of events. Miraculous and otherwise, he ends up basically becoming the vizier, the second in charge to the pharaoh. So as I tell my students all the time, at that time in that part of the world, that was basically being the second most powerful human being on the planet. So you go from the absolute depths to the absolute heights, but he's now in a position of power, and as is not so uncommon in the stories of our ancestors in Genesis, there is a famine. And so there is a struggle for his brothers remaining in the land of Canaan, eventually the land of Israel, to remain there. And so they go where most people went at that time in that place. You went to the breadbasket of the Middle East, to Egypt, the place where there was almost always something. And in this case, that something was only there because of Joseph's wisdom. Egypt was actually going to be in the same exact position as everyone else. And Joseph had these visions and these dreams that told him there's going to be 7 really bad years. There's going to be 7 good years to precede them. Store your stuff up, make sure you've got it so that when the bad years come, you'll be able to survive. And sure enough, that's what happens. But his brothers end up coming down to Egypt, and they don't recognize him. Not so unsurprising from the amount of time that's passed. But Joseph, of course, recognizes all of them. And he plays a sort of series of, well, how can I put this? I don't want to call it manipulative, but it's pretty manipulative, behaviors. He plays with his brothers a bit, but he does it with a certain kind of intentionality. He doesn't know whether he can trust them or not. And so he conceives a whole, operation in which his brother Benjamin is held basically under, sort of fake charges. They sneak something into one of the bags to suggest they're stealing on their way out of town. And Benjamin is the beloved last child. So Joseph was, his father's beloved child. It's very special. As far as his father is concerned, he's dead, he's gone. And so now this Benjamin is going to be taken and held captive in Egypt. And the oldest brother, Judah, stands up and says, you know what, I can't do this, right? I can't go back to my father and tell him that his next favorite, his baby child, is going to stay in prison here. I can't do it. It's going to basically make him, who's already on the edge, off the edge, right? And so Joseph, finally seeing some amount of compassion from his brothers, he basically can't keep up the charade anymore. He says to himself, I can't continue to act in this way where my brothers don't know who I am. And so he does something that seems actually really like it makes perfect sense, but the more I studied it and the more I thought about it, it's actually somewhat counterintuitive. Imagine that you're in the palace. Imagine the brothers are there, right? Joseph is standing up on the bema, as it were, and he's surrounded by soldiers. He's surrounded by the retinue of the Egyptian palace. And his brothers are there again in a powerless position. And he wants to reveal his identity to his brothers, but he sends the rest of the Egyptians away. He sends away the soldiers, he sends away the guards, sends away the scribes, all of the people, and now it's just him and his brothers in the room. Now, why might we think that that's maybe not the smartest move? Don't think too hard. Very good, okay? His brothers who threw him in a pit and sold him into slavery, right, of which there are many of them and only one of him, okay? So he sends away all of his protection. He gets everybody out of there. Now, again, the beautiful read of this story is that he wants to have an intimate moment with his brothers. He wants to have this moment of reconciliation, which is what actually happens. It's a beautiful story of reconciliation. But there is this part of us that sort of looks at it with that eye and says, oh my God, that's a bit of a risky maneuver, okay? Now, this isn't a small detail to the rabbis. The sages actually identify this and extrapolate from this incident and really one other example from a few weeks ago to create what actually is a very significant rabbinic teaching, one that is held in very, very significant, great esteem, which has to do with something perhaps unexpected. So what is that unexpected thing? The Midrash tells us, in the name of Rabbi Shmuel Ber Nachman, he says that Joseph puts himself purposely in grave danger. Why? Okay, right? If his brothers had killed him, no one would have known whom to blame, right? I think that's probably not the right word. He just would have been killed. That's bad enough. Forget who's to blame. Right, it's very likely his brothers might have taken his life. So why does he say everybody should leave? We're told it's because he didn't want to embarrass his brothers. Okay? He didn't want to shame his brothers because in order to reveal himself, he has to reveal the story of what they did to him. So if he had done that and done it publicly in front of all of these strangers who knew nothing about any of them, he would have caused great embarrassment, great shame to his brothers. And so we're told, right, Joseph was doing this out of consideration for them. And as a result of it, I'm going to teach you a tiny bit of Talmud, okay, tiny bit of rabbinic rhetoric. So the rabbis have a common rhetorical device they use. It's called in Hebrew a kal v'chomer. In English, the closest thing I can think to describe it is all the more so. Right? So if something is a situation, it's I think in Latin it's sort of from minor to major or from major to minor. They take an example and they say if it's the example in this case, right, if he is so concerned for his brothers who did all of these terrible things to him, who he had every right to do in kind, And yet he's concerned for their, state and status in front of strangers. If he's that concerned in this case, all the more so when we ourselves are in a position of where we might embarrass somebody, we need to be extra careful of our restraint. So much so that they actually decide that it's not just a sort of if or a but. The rabbis basically say that if given the choice between embarrassing someone or having your life taken, you are to have your life taken rather than embarrass them. Okay, so I'm going to emphasize that again. Basically, put it another way, better to die than to embarrass somebody else in public. Okay, so let that sit in for a second. Okay, that might be, right? Most of us might be saying, okay, that's a little bit extreme. Okay, it's a little bit extreme. And to a large degree, that's true. But when you study actually through the generations, right, through the rabbis of the medieval period, through even the sort of more modern periods of halachic writing, this extreme kind of position is still held pretty much to the same regard. Okay, it's not necessarily that anybody has ever actually put themselves in this position, but we're meant to think of it that way, right? It should be that significant of an act that if we are in a position in which we might embarrass somebody, or that we are, even worse, consciously about to embarrass somebody or shame somebody publicly, that we would be better, right, to lose our lives than to do exactly that. So I want to share with you a little bit of a teaching on top of this. It comes from Rabbi Shai Held, who I've quoted quite a lot recently, but he's just a brilliant rabbi. He's the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivat Hadar in the city. And so he writes as follows. He says, just how literally is this prohibition meant to be taken? Are we really supposed to submit to death rather than bring shame upon another person? At first glance, he says, this seems like a beautiful idea, potentially even a life-transforming one, but undoubtedly also a homiletic one. Our sages want us to know just how serious a crime it is to shame and humiliate another person. So they wax hyperbolic, telling us that we should prefer to be killed rather than commit such an egregious crime. In any case, the expression, and this is the exact phrasing of it in the Talmud, is it is preferable to act in a certain way. Okay, right? It's not a mitzvah, it's not a commandment, it's not an obligation in that sense, right? It says it's preferable to act in this way. As he says, that sounds much more like advice than it does like law. And yet, amazingly, some of the most significant figures in the history of Jewish law insist that our principle is not hyperbole at all, rather a simple and straightforward statement of legal obligation. We are required by law to die rather than humiliate another person. Ask a reasonably knowledgeable Jew, and he or she is likely to tell you that there are 3 cardinal sins in Judaism, 3 offenses one should prefer to die than to commit. But according to these scholars, and those ones are idolatry, sexual immorality, and murder. According to these scholars, stunningly, humiliation appears to be a 4th. So in other words, right, you have the top 3, and then the next one down the list is humiliation. So why, says Rabbi Held, is Judaism so preoccupied with avoiding humiliation? A great sage, Rabbeinu Yonah, who is from 13th century, suggests that humiliation has, quote, shades of murder. If this strikes you as far-fetched, he says, take a moment, close your eyes, and imagine a moment in your life when you have felt most deeply humiliated. Your body, your blood flow, everything feels terrifyingly off-kilter, almost like a mini-death. How many people have found themselves wishing they could die rather than be humiliated in the same way again? In a similar vein, Rabbi Eliyahu HaKohen of Izmir, he lived around the 17th century, 18th century, 17th century, suggests that humiliation is actually worse than murder. Murder happens all at once and then it's over, he says, but humiliation takes place slowly and is torturously painful. Moreover, murder happens once, but when someone is humiliated, he is humiliated anew each time he sees the people who witnessed it. And it is like being killed over and over again. But, he says, amongst all this, there is a reason why, or a reason as he estimates that we really need to pay attention to this. He says that for us, all too often we tend to rationalize the act of embarrassing people. Sometimes after speaking abusively to another person, we can almost hear ourselves saying, it's not like I killed them, is it? And actually, Jewish ethics reminds us it is. Taking inspiration from the examples of Joseph and another one again involving Tamar, the sages want us to live as if the dignity of the people we meet is the most important thing in the world. Because, according to Jewish theology, it just might be. Now, obviously, there are parts of the Torah, parts of our tradition that are purposely hyperbolic. I don't think in the end my advice to anybody here is certainly not to follow this dictum to its letter. It's not the intention of it. But I think especially in this day and age, with especially right the means by which every one of us has in our pocket right now to humiliate somebody publicly online, to do it in the paper, to do it in the street, to do it in the store. In the last, I'd say, week and a half just being in Sag Harbor, I have seen some people behave in some pretty terrible ways in public, embarrassing people who are working in town, who made a mistake, whatever it might be. A lot of times in which we don't even realize how dangerous it is when we say something out in public about somebody else that affects them in a really deep kind of way, right? It is hyperbolic, but the description that Rabbi Held gives, right? If you really close your eyes and you remember that moment in your life, hopefully it's not many, right? But that moment when you've been on either side of this equation, okay? And the times in which it's happened to you, and you realize, right, every day to get up, to see those people again, to be in that space again feels almost impossible. And the times in our lives where we probably have done it, maybe without any consciousness or intention to harm, reactionary, experience in the moment. But nonetheless, right, the rabbis create really, extended levels of expectation for us because their big concern is not about the big moment. It's about all the little moments, right? All those little times where we have a choice, when we have some moment in which we can say, if there's something that has to be dealt with here, that it can be dealt with quietly, that it can be dealt with, to the side in which we can address it in that space. And that doesn't always work. There are plenty of texts that counterbalance it that say if you're silent in the face of something horrible, right, that's a problem as well. But in this case, it's not. That's a different scenario, right? Standing up to an injustice, speaking out against something that's terrible that's happening, those are obligations as well. When you're talking about embarrassing somebody or shaming somebody, there's almost never an occasion that will justify that. There's almost always some other way of addressing a situation or getting an outcome that you need that doesn't involve that. And the kal vachomer that I told you before, right, from light to heavy, from small to big, their teaching is this. If Joseph, who went through all of that terrible stuff, right, who, received the kind of abuse that he received from his own kin, could stand up in front of them and make this decision, right, not to shame them, not to embarrass them, and ultimately to forgive them, kal vachomer, as the rabbis say, all the more so that us, in our usual positions that are not nearly that extreme, that we should be all the more conscious of the power of our words, right? The power of our words to build up or to destroy. And I think, we are in a world and in a time where it is easier than ever to do exactly this kind of stuff. And I think we have to all hold ourselves just a little bit higher of a standard, okay? And I don't mean this I'm not pointing fingers at anyone other than myself, right? I'll say it to myself, right? Have to be much more conscious of those times in which, right, the emotions get the better of me and I don't remember that I'm dealing with a human being, right, and their dignity matters. And it doesn't matter just because some abstract sense. It matters because in our tradition, right, the dignity of a human being, as Rabbi Held says, is of the utmost importance. So I know you're all saints and none of you ever do any of these things wrong, so it's not directed at you, but for your own rabbi, it's something I'm certainly going to be thinking about this week and hopefully really for the rest of my life. So with that, I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. Baruch Tiyeh, Baruch Tiyeh. I'll invite us now to rise as we turn back in our prayer books to page 586, at the very bottom of the page, Aleinu L'Shabeach. Aleinu L'Shabeach Ladon HaKol, Latet Gedula Liotzer Breshit, Shelo Asanu Kegoyeh Aratzot, Velo Samanu Kemishpechot Adama, Shelo Sam Chelkenu Kahem, Vegor Aleinu Kechol Hamonam, Vanachnu Korim, Umishtachavim, Umodim Lifnei Melech, Malchei Hamlachim HaKadosh, Baruch Hu, page 591. Benemar, Behaya Adonai, Lemelech al kol haaretz, Vayom hahu, Yeh Adonai echad, Ushemo echad. ask those in mourning, those observing yahrzeit, to please remain standing. Everyone else may be seated at this time. I think first of those who passed in our community in recent months: Heather Abrams, David Aminoff, Louise Crandall, Mal Daphner, Judith Barry Emanuel, Barbara Goldfarb, Lita Goldsmith, Harry Heller, Barbara Kushner, Ann Lieber, Robert Lykoff, Jeffrey Miller, James Pappas, Danielle Rigg, Janice Sambol, William Speck, Harlan Spitz, Charles Spiropoulos, Ronald Seth Tempowski, Alan Stephen Weinstein, Ronald Weller, and Susan Wolfson. We also marked the yahrzeits that occurred during the last week for Ida Abelman, Gladys Abraham, William Edelberg, Alex Alexander, Rosella Baskin, Sam Bromberg, Hyman Schwatzky, Frank Cohen, Ida Krowitz, Leonard Krowitz, Louis Krowitz, Ruben Daphner, Faith Diskin, Kivi Dornfeld, Jacob Eisenberg, Aaron Epstein, Joseph Epstein, Lena Epstein, Paula Epstein, Herbert Fowler, Estelle Fox, Bessie Goldberg, Ann Goldenson, Mark Goldfarb, Florence Epstein Goldman, Mitchell Goldman, Harriet Green, Korea Grossman, Caroline Harrison, Rita Hertzfeld, Ida Hilkowitz, Irving Hirschberg, Hilda Ivers, Bertha Spitz Cantor, Arthur Kaplan, Ethel Kurtzman, Molly Klein, Uda Cravat, Frank Lester, Jacques Nouvel, Joan Rocker Newman, Mary Newmark, Hans Oppenheimer, Sarah Shockett, Dorothy Schroeder, Samuel Schwartz, Molly Senf, Harry Silberman, and Irvin Weitzman. Is there anyone else for whom anyone is saying Kaddish tonight that'd like to mention their names? I'll invite those watching at home, if you have names of your loved ones, to add. I'll invite the mourners to join with me on page 598. If it's your custom to rise alongside them, you may do so at this time. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divrach cherutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, b'agala v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shemei Rabbah mevarach la'alam u'li'almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yit'aleh v'yit'alal shemei dekudsha b'richu. Leila mikol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shalama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav u'yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Zichronam livracha, may every one of their memories be for a blessing. Okay, well, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. All right, a couple quick announcements, and the first is really more of a sad acknowledgement. I'm not sure, we have a few people who've joined the temple more recently, or maybe it's the first time being here. So Harry Heller passed away this week, and for those that remember Harry, wonderful human being. His wife Annette had passed actually just before I got here, so I never got to meet her, but one of the most, sort of iconic things they did at our temple was they would read the book of Jonah together on Yom Kippur. So as much as we've tried to fill that gap over the years, from what I gather, we could never really, match that. It was really one of these very special things about this temple. And it was a lovely, lovely human being. So Zichrono Livracha, may his memory always be for a blessing. And, he will certainly be missed by all of us. On a happier note, I want to wish, of course, everyone Shabbat Shalom and a Happy New Year, and invite you to join us for our Oneg Shabbat as soon as we're done with services, which now I'm told features soup. So, you go away for a week and now there's soup. It's, first in my time that I can remember, but I think that's lovely, especially on a cold night. So please join us. Also, of course, to join us for Shabbat services tomorrow at 10 o'clock, followed by Torah study, and it being the first Shabbat of the month, this will be our Torah study using the Women's Torah Commentary this month, led by Myra Peskowitz. And I'll say I meant to write down the name of the representative who did it, but as we know today, the swearing in of the new Congress. But one positive note was that a representative, I think from Michigan, but I don't remember her name, chose to use the Women's Torah Commentary as the Bible that she is sworn in with. So I thought that was pretty. There you go. See, I should have known my politically involved third row here is going to know the answer right away. But I just thought that was a really wonderful thing, and I'll actually, share that tomorrow with the group. But we're always really welcoming of anybody who wants to join us for our Torah study any week, but especially when you get a chance to learn with Myra, it's just a real treat. So hopefully you'll join us again in person or online. Also a reminder of our virtual lay-led minyan every Sunday at 9:30. Again, that's every Monday at 9:30. That service is only on Zoom. Shelley also wanted me to make sure to thank everybody who volunteered to help with our Maureen's Haven shelter last Sunday, so thank you to everybody either watching or who's here that helped with that. Also, a reminder, next Shabbat, we're bringing back the potluck, and thank you to Andrea, as always, for taking on the thankless job of organizing us, of herding the cats, as it were. So if you're going to be able to join us, and please, please, please do so, make sure that you are in contact with Andrea so we know what food you are bringing. Vegetarian food, and just contact Andrea, let her know. And we're very much excited for that, and Will be back with us next week, so we'll eat, we'll sing a little, we'll have a good time. Coming up this week, Monday, 10:30, Nida Mitzvah, 1 o'clock, a Social Justice Committee meeting, yes, virtual, yes. A virtual Musar class with Myra at 7 o'clock. Also on Tuesday, the Anti-Semitism Committee is meeting at 7 o'clock on Zoom. Ann Silver, who's here tonight, if anybody is interested in getting involved, please do contact Ann directly. Also on Wednesday from 6 to 7 o'clock, we have our post-B'nai Mitzvah class. This month will be run by Sandra Dubin, focusing on the topic of anti-Semitism, past and present. So this will be taught to our B'nai Mitzvah students. But we're also open if you know any family students out here who wants, not exactly connected to the temple yet, would like to join for that. I think Shelley is trying to get as many people involved in that as possible. With that, did I miss anything else? Neil, anything? No? Good. Okay. So we'll end our service with Shalom Aleichem, I think, tonight on page 627, and then we'll do Kiddush and Motzi and go next door. Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Boachem leshalom, malachei hashalom, malachei elyon. Mi melech malachei hamlachim, hakadosh baruch hu. Baruchuni leshalom, malachei hashalom, malachei elyon. Mi melech malchei hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Tzedchem leshalom, malachei hashalom, malachei elyon. Mi melech malchei hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We'll turn to page 123 and we'll rise for Kiddush. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu v'shabahat kodsho b'havahu v'ratzonin chilanu zikaron l'maaseh v'reishit Ki hu yom techila lemikrae kodesh, zecher letziat Mitzrayim, kivanu v'acharta, ve'otanu kidashta, mikol hamim, ve'shabat kodshecha, ve'ahava uvratzon hinchaltanu, Baruch atah Adonai, Mekadesh HaShabbat. Amen. Chaim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. Shabbat shalom, everybody. Please come next door. All right. Oh, the drums. Are in